The invention of bows and arrows in North America. The invention of the bow and arrow in North America is a crucial event in the history of North American indigenous people. It allowed for more effective hunting, tracking, and warfare. The bow was used to hunt large game like deer or buffalo that would have been very difficult to kill with spears or clubs alone. Bows were also used to track animals by following their footprints or scat, the remains left behind by an animal. The bow was also used for warfare against rival tribes, either as a weapon itself or to fire projectiles such as arrows into enemy territory. Bows and arrows also allowed for the development of ballistic weapons. Arrows could be fired at enemies to cause harm or death, or over long distances in order to bring down prey. The invention of bows and arrows revolutionized how indigenous people live their lives with more effective hunting, tracking, and warfare tactics. Bows and arrows allowed for excessive force because the user had much more control than with other weapons such as spears or clubs. Bows and arrows were used in combat to kill enemies, but it took a lot of practice to learn how to use the bow effectively. This term is defined as a weapon, such as a bow and arrow, used for shooting arrows at distant targets. It has the following synonyms: archery, long-range weaponry, hunting, projectiles weapons. A projectile weapon is any weapon that fires an arrow or other projectile at a target. Examples of such weapons include bows and crossbows. The spear is a thrusting weapon, similar to the lance, but with a long pointed head for greater reach and penetration. The spear is thrown by hand, thrust through the target, and once embedded in the enemy's body. The bow and arrow is one of the oldest projectile weapons. Projectiles include projectiles used in battles and other weapons, in particular firearms and artillery weapons. Projectiles move through the air and take to flight after they are thrown or fired in order to impart kinetic energy, momentum, and thrust. The act of propelling a projectile with a bow is called arrowing, while the use of one without mechanical propulsion is called archery. Projectiles can be thrown, fired from a cannon or catapult, or dropped from any height by an explosive device. In medieval Europe, arrows were used as projectiles with bows and crossbows. They were the dominant form of projectile weaponry throughout the medieval period. The use of projectiles with bows and crossbows is said to have been invented by the Assyrians in either 700 BC or 1200 BC. Quiver is a container for carrying arrows and other projectiles, which is typically tubular or cylindrical. This allows a user to carry multiple arrows at once. Stick is a rod with a point at one end and a rounded, club-like head or knob at the other. The archer will then move the hand close to the center of their chest, while they take an extended step forward which will bring their bow arm locked in place. The archer will maintain their balance, select the arrow to shoot, and take aim by turning their head from side to side. A release is often generated when the archer feels the tension on the bowstring and will uncinch it. This motion is called capturing. The bowstring will now be pulled with force, and the arrow will be released. What's so new about the development of the bow and arrow? It was invented in the Stone Age around 10,000 BC by hunter-gatherers who utilized it as a hunting tool and weapon for self-defense. However, it was not until the 19th century that it became a weapon of choice for hunters and warriors. The bow and arrow is one of the most important inventions of all time. It has been used to hunt, kill, defend, fight wars, and much more. The bow and arrow has been used in different civilizations such as ancient Egypt, China, Europe, Mesoamerica, Pacific Islands, etc. The development of the bow and arrow is one of many examples that show how human beings are able to adapt to changing environments with new technologies. The invention of the bow and arrow has had a huge impact on civilization. The bow and arrow allowed for hunting game at a distance and also allowed the hunter to make ambushes on predators or prey. First, the invention of the bow and arrow allowed for hunting game at distance. With new technologies, people are inventing new tools that allow them to hunt different kinds of animals in different ways. Second, the invention of different types of bows allowed people to hunt with different tactics. For example, some bows allow for greater force in the arrow while others have a high draw weight which allows one to shoot farther without pulling as hard. Another development was the crossbow, which has much more power than a simple bow and can be used from a distance with accuracy and speed. The history of bows and arrows starts with the written records in hunter-gatherer cultures such as the Mesopotamians and Egyptians, dating back to around 5000 BC. The bow was invented in ancient China by the fire arrow culture, also dating back to 5000 BC. They used a rounded stick which they attached feathers to, with a bow crafted from a yew tree. The first use of bows in war was recorded by Homer in the Iliad, where the Achaeans used them against the Trojans. Archery is a discipline of ranged weaponry and combat encompassing the use of bows. Crossbows, possibly used in conjunction with swords or spears, and other types of projectile weapons. The archer is one of the more basic classes in Broken Age where they serve as the majority of ranged damage. They are not short-ranged themselves, but rather deal more damage from a farther distance than any other class. When the archer draws back their arrow and lets it fly, they can see its path in a cone-like shape in front of them. The range is the distance that archers can place an arrow before losing accuracy and is based on the archer's skill level. Why did the invention of the bow change warfare? The bow was a much more powerful weapon than the spear and allowed for greater accuracy and longer range. The bow allowed for easier killing from a distance. The demise of many ancient civilizations occurred due to the invention of new weapons. The invention of the crossbow was one of the most significant changes in medieval warfare. The bow changed warfare because it had a greater power, accuracy, and range than spear, but was much slower. Since the bow was still slower, it also forced people to be farther away from the enemy. This meant that they had a greater range of movement which allowed them to attack quickly and in greater numbers. This made the bow an advantage in warfare. The bow was also a much more powerful and accurate weapon. This is because the bow placed the force of the string onto a small area which made it easier to pull back. Spears were held lower than bows so that they could be used with one hand. This made them less powerful and more difficult to use with the same accuracy as a bow. Bow and arrows were also much easier to make and use than spears, which would have required a long time to prepare. Thank you for watching how the invention of the bow arrow has changed warfare and hunting, and forget to subscribe to my channel, please.